In Raqqa, Islamic State is making its final stand. Fighting their way into the heart of the caliphate, a fragile coalition of powers, great and small, of Arabs and Kurds, of men and women. The cost has been high, the battle long, and it may be a lot longer still. This is more than the final showdown with IS in its capital.
Like, I believe in why I might die. Like, I'm dying for something that's bigger than me.
Raqqa may be the end of one fight, but the beginning of another, a battle for territory, both physical and ideological.
They will get there in the end, and when they do, the fall of Raqqa will probably mean the end of the caliphate. But it won't mean the end of ISIS ideology, and it also won't mean the end of this war.
This story begins not in Raqqa, but in Kobani. What remains of this largely Kurdish city stands as a monument to a brutal turning point in the war against Islamic State. It was here that IS reached its high watermark, its territory extending as far as the Turkish border. It was here that it met its first significant defeat. Commander Son Huyn played her part in that. Her nom de guerre means red blood. The cemetery in Kobani testifies to just how high a price Kurdish fighters have already paid in the war against IS.
شر داعش شركة بسيكولوجية بترس إنسان تقاضي إنسان تسليم بقري شخو هاتنا داعش دسبيكر جندارة دسبيكر جندارة تشتي خوي كوهيز جديد تانغ بون أو دبابة بون وجلي خوي رش بون يعني ما قلت همنا التجربة ما ملي شر درب ذهبون نشر باجران ذهبون.
For the Kurds, this is part of a wider battle, for a long-held dream of self-determination. But for Son Huyn, the youngest of 11 children in a conservative society, it's also personal.
خوش كلمة كشتي زوجي بون يعني من جيانا مان ميزات كر متقول قرق أزوكي وان جيانا كم يعني تشوا وبيكواز مالبات بي بحسن از تبرينا بهوالا بون بشتكواز تبرينا بهوالا بون خيالي منه بچوكي هرتمي مجيان كر işte jin nekane tiştekî bike, jin nekane şar bike, jin nekane ji derveyî karê hindir karê din bike. Min yani ji ber hêrsî min hebû, yani acizbûnekî min hemberî min hebû.
Today, Son Huyn is in command of around 1,000 fighters on the Raqqa front lines. Periods of intense fighting are punctuated by the mundane routines of war. Together, these men and women make up the Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, an alliance that includes Arabs but is led by the Kurds. Their success against IS has come thanks in no small part to backing from the United States. The Americans have quietly built up a presence on the ground, providing weapons, training and firepower. With their help, the SDF have chased Islamic State out of Kurdish areas and beyond, reaching across the Euphrates and into mainly Arab territory to the west. This is Manbij. The SDF took this city last August after 2.5 years under IS rule. This building was their courthouse. Here, the Islamic State would sit in judgment over people they deemed to have broken their laws. Punishments would be meted out in the car park opposite. A local shopkeeper witnessed many of their gruesome executions. Even though IS is gone from here now, he asked us not to reveal his identity for fear of reprisals.
الصلب بعد ما يقصوا العالم الصلب بعده بيومين يظلوا يومين صالبينه يعني تطلع ريحة البني آدم ويصلبوه لحتى وما يدفنوه ما يعطوه لأهله يزتوه بغير إنه مطرحه بس ما تجيبه أي كلمة إذا بدك تشرب سيكارة بده يعني أصل لك أصبعك احتمال إذا سرقت إذا بس اثنين شهدوا عليك خلاص يعني بزتوا عالم من فوق الأوتيل هذا 5 طوابع بزتوه من فوق على الأرض وهيك شيء.
Down in the basement, their brutal legacy lingers like a ghost. In this dungeon, IS tortured its prisoners. A policeman showed us the cell where his uncle was kept. Barely big enough to contain a man. Tiny air holes to keep him alive. When they let him out, after 4 days, they had to amputate his leg. Even in death, there was no escape. In a vast graveyard in the centre of Manbij, its fighters have smashed every single headstone. And even though Islamic State has been chased out of town, that doesn't mean its ideology has gone with it.
شفنا ما يعني كسر القبور، ايش القبور؟ البني ادمين عم بتموت، وقفت على الحجر. البني ادمين ماتت، وقفت على الحجرات. والله صلاة وصيام، والله وجماعة كافر، والله الأولاد تشوف بالجوامع، والله ما تشوف ولد فلتان، ما تشوف ولد يتعاطى في بنت، ما تشوف زلمة يتعاطى في مرة. يعني الزلمة كويس، الولد كويس، المرة غطاها كويس.
From Manbij, we get a sense of what lies ahead. It has been a long road to the capital of the caliphate. The final stretch may be the hardest yet. Commander Son Huyn and her units are on the western front. It's a tight squeeze inside a homemade armoured truck with a couple of her fighters driving towards the centre of Raqqa. Islamic State is supposed to be surrounded inside the old city. But IS have dug tunnels, and they frequently pop up where you don't expect them.
Well, these fighters, they're coming up against IS snipers in all of these streets around here. Other than that, they've got drones, they've got suicide car bombs. This is going to be a very, very hard fight into the centre of Raqqa.
Back at base, Son Huyn and her fellow commanders are having a strategy meeting. As the fight enters the narrow streets of the city, they're constantly having to adjust their tactics.
دروج بري تري أو نخون لزعيدي دكتن وكي فضاي خاكرنا حركاتي وقت كواتين أنجام نقرتن يعني تدبيري هفلا هبو هم جبوا عربي تقماني وهم جي تدبيري هفلا بحرالي دهبو هم وكي مركز داعشي ووكي داعش خلص كرنا.
It's also about territory. But what does a Kurdish-led coalition do when it captures the capital of Sunni Arab fundamentalism? Well, there is a plan for Raqqa after the fall of Islamic State, and that brings us back to Manbij. Here, a multi-ethnic military and civil council has brought life and stability back to this mainly Arab city under the auspices of the Kurdish-led SDF.
الوضع عندنا بفضل طبعا الديمقراطي حاليا كويس.
تمينا بيركين في البلد هون وتحملنا ظلم داعش وتحملنا مثل ما بيقولوا يعني القهر اللي كان موجود هون عندنا في البلد هون لحتى اجوا هون الاخوه الاكراد واجوا التحالف هون خلصونا من داعش.
The anti-IS coalition sees Manbij as a template for Raqqa post-IS, but it is, at best, a temporary arrangement. Syria has been at war for more than 6 years now. Longer than the whole of World War II. The fight against Islamic State is but one facet of an ongoing conflict in which the world's big powers, the US, Russia and others, have not only interests but troops on the ground. From a hilltop overlooking the Manbij countryside, Roni Walat, a local Kurdish commander, showed me the point at which all of these competing forces come face to face.
Okay, well, it's a pretty complicated picture, but basically I think it boils down to this. From the west all the way up to the north, up to the Euphrates River over there, is controlled by the Americans. From that same western point all the way to the south is controlled by the Syrian regime. That describes a sort of D shape. In the middle of that is the pocket of the Manbij Military Council, which is an Arab-Kurdish coalition but is basically controlled by the Kurds. But in between all of that, there's a Russian base just over there, an American base just 4 kilometers along from that, and surrounding all of it are FSA forces, Free Syrian Army, that are basically sponsored by the Turks.
For now, the battle against Islamic State provides a kind of common purpose. But once IS is gone, the potential for conflict between these big powers is very real.
اف توتر الدبرة روسيا داد نبرة تحالف ده زي دوية ذاتن اف الشر بيغنتيا خال شر ديجي ارهابي ديجي داعش شركة جهاني اساس دهات مشاندن ترك نافدا قطر نافدا بو روسيا نافدا رژیم نافدا ایران نافدا بگشتی جبلی شركة جهاني سمي ما نكاي بنافجي بكي.
The Kurds are in a difficult position. Their fighters belong to a branch of the PKK, which is considered a terrorist organisation by both Turkey and the United States. For now, the Syrian Kurds have the backing of the Americans, but Turkey, a NATO ally, carries out sporadic attacks against them. And that's because their fight against the Islamic State is really about building their own state. They call it a revolution, and it's attracting its share of idealistic outsiders. One of the fighters in Commander Son Huin's unit is Kimmy Taylor. Originally from Blackburn, she's a former maths student who's left behind a life of activism at home to come to Syria to fight Islamic State.
There's just a million ways to die here. It's not just on the front. There is no front line, really. It's like a huge space of war that is like, even though it seems peaceful here, like anything can happen.
Yeah. What are the biggest worries? The biggest threats?
On the moving front, like where we're moving to take more space, it's snipers and mines. There's mines everywhere and there's snipers everywhere.
Are you scared?
No, there is something bigger than me. It's for people here. It's for women here and for women all in the Middle East and even maybe potentially the world.
Those who have given their lives to this cause are celebrated as martyrs to a social revolution with its roots in Marxist-Leninist ideology. It's a movement that tolerates little dissent. Opposition activists have been jailed and thousands of young people have fled to escape conscription. Such is the way of revolutions. For Son Huin, a true believer, the fight against IS is but one battle in a longer war to convert her own people to the cause.
هدفي ما تاني شری چکداری ام نگردست برش میگوتو يعني دست بکی از باوی خود دست پی بکم ذهنیت کسر جنی هاتی مشاندن ده شخص جنی دل سر انسانی فقیر فقرا کاتی مشاندن لدجی مروواتی يعني پشت شر چکداری هم دست به شر ذهنیت کن.
Meanwhile, on the Raqqa front lines, there's still much fighting to be done. Inching their way into the city, house by house, Son Huin's fighters are so close they can hear IS in the building across the street.
This is, of course, a battle for territory. They're fighting to take the capital of the caliphate. Oh, there's something happening here. Everyone's just springing into action. They think they've got some ISIS snipers in the buildings around.
Right. First piece is good.
We got one, yes?
Yes, let's go.
What's going on? Can you just tell me what's...
They are moving here. They are moving here.
They now face Islamic State at perhaps its most dangerous. Wounded, cornered, and with nothing left to lose. But the fall of IS is within sight. The question is, can their revolution survive the collapse of the caliphate in the face of Syria's still unfinished war?
الشباب مرحبا